She was working herself to death in the fields. The cowboy said, "Let me carry that load." The sun rose every morning over the wide open fields like a judge that never slept, casting its pale gold light on rows of earth that had already taken more from her than they had ever given back, and yet she stood there again, bent at the waist, hands rough and cracked, shoulders trembling beneath a load that no woman should have had to carry alone. But she did, day after day, because life had taught her early that no one was coming to save her, that strength was not something you chose but something forced upon you when the world decided you were expendable, and so she worked, not because she dreamed of it, but because stopping meant starving, and starving meant dying, and dying would mean she had failed the promise she once whispered to herself over her mother's grave: "I will survive." The fields were endless, the work merciless, the heat cruel, and the overseer's voice sharp as a whip, but she never complained, because complaining never lightened the load, and tears dried faster than sweat in a place like this. She carried sacks heavier than her own body, lifted crates that bruised her ribs, and dragged tools that cut her palms open, binding them at night with scraps of cloth so she could wake before dawn and do it all again, while others passed by pretending not to see, because seeing would mean admitting cruelty, and admitting cruelty would demand courage most people didn't have. Her name barely mattered anymore. Here, she was just another body bent toward the dirt, another back to break, another soul the land would consume quietly. Then one morning, as the wind shifted and dust curled low across the ground, a shadow fell where no shadow should have been, tall, steady, unmoving, and she felt it before she saw it, that strange pause in the air, the sudden silence when something important is about to happen. She straightened slowly, pain shooting through her spine, and there he was, a cowboy, weathered and calm, boots worn smooth by miles of honest ground, eyes dark with something deeper than curiosity, watching her not like a burden, not like a tool, but like a human being. He didn't speak at first, just observed, as she bent again to lift a sack that was clearly too heavy, her knees buckling under the weight. That's when he stepped forward and said the words that would split her life in two: "Let me carry that load." She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Men didn't offer help here, kindness was expensive, and trust had cost her too much already. She told him she was fine, that she'd managed before, that she didn't need saving, but he didn't argue, didn't insist, didn't touch the sack. He just stood there and said quietly, "I can see you're working yourself to death." Something in his voice, not pity, not desire, just truth, made her chest tighten, because being seen was more terrifying than being ignored. Around them, the world kept moving, but for a moment, everything slowed, and she realized how tired she was, not just in her bones, but in her spirit. He finally lifted the sack himself, easy as if it weighed nothing, and started walking toward the barn, not asking permission, not demanding gratitude, simply carrying what she had been breaking herself under. People stared. Whispers followed. Rules were broken. And she stood frozen, hands empty for the first time in years, unsure whether to run after him or collapse right there in the dirt. If you've ever felt invisible, she followed him eventually, step by careful step, afraid that if she moved too fast the moment would vanish like all the good things before it, and when she reached the barn, he had already stacked the sack neatly, wiping his hands on his jeans like this was the most natural thing in the world, as if kindness was not an act of rebellion here but a habit. And when she demanded to know why he'd done it, why he'd risked trouble, why he'd noticed her at all, he answered simply, "Because no one should carry everything alone." Those words hit harder than any overseer's shout ever had, because they cracked something open she had sealed shut long ago, the belief that her suffering was normal, deserved, inevitable. He didn't promise rescue, didn't offer grand speeches, didn't claim to change her life in a day. Instead, he came back the next morning, and the next, quietly taking the heaviest loads, teaching her how to pace her strength, slipping her food when he thought she hadn't eaten, standing between her and cruelty without ever making a show of it. People noticed. Some mocked him. Some warned him. But he didn't flinch, because real strength doesn't announce itself, it just shows up again and again. Slowly, her body healed in small ways, fewer tremors, deeper breaths, nights without collapsing in pain. But more importantly, her spirit began to remember something it had forgotten: hope. She learned his story too, how he had once lost everything to drought and bad luck, how pride nearly killed him, how he'd survived because someone else had stepped in when he was too broken to ask. "We don't get through life alone," he told her one evening as the sun bled red across the fields. "We just pretend we do." When the season changed, so did her fate. Opportunities came not because she begged, but because she stood taller, spoke clearer, believed, maybe for the first time, that she deserved better. And when she finally left the fields, not running but walking, head high, she looked back once and saw him watching, not as a savior, not as an owner, but as someone proud to have lightened another human's burden. The world didn't suddenly become fair, but it became possible, and that made all the difference. If this story reminded you that kindness still exists, that strength can be shared, and that your load doesn't define your worth, subscribe to this channel. More stories are coming, and one of them might be the reminder you didn't know you needed.